Good afternoon, everybody. It's Thursday, April 14, 2022, 3 p.m. And I would like to welcome you to the Pinole City Council Finance Subcommittee meeting agenda. My name is Vincent Salimi. I'm the mayor of the city. And I will move on to the first item. Madam City Clerk, good afternoon. Can you please do the roll call? Item A, call to order. Good afternoon, Madam City Clerk. Assistant Madam City Clerk, can you please do the roll call, please?
Yes, I can go ahead and assist. Mayor Salimi,
Here.
Director Guillory, Mayor Pro Tem Murphy, Pro Tem Murphy. You speak virtually, but
I think we have a
Meeting.
problem hearing
I think there's a
so
technical
Miss
problem.
Bell, I know that she's talking, but we don't hear her here.
Thank you. I can hear you now.
We can hear you now.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I don't think any of the Zoom participants heard the start of the meeting. I don't know where we landed, but we may need to.
Okay, we'll restart it if it's fine with everybody. It's April 14, 2022, 3 p.m. and I call to order the Pinole City Council Finance Subcommittee meeting. Item A. Madam City Clerk, good afternoon. Call to order, please. Can I have a roll call?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Mayor Pro Tem Murphy.
I'm here.
Mayor Salimi
Here.
and Treasurer Swearingen. I'll note for the record that Treasurer Swearingen is not in attendance. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Item number B on the agenda, public comment. Do we have any member of the public who wish to talk to this afternoon?
No, Mayor, not at this time. There are no in-person or virtual comments.
Thank you. Item number C. Consent item. I don't see any items on the consent items C. I will then move on to item. I would ask you if we have any public comment on that item. I don't believe so.
No public comments.
Thank you. I would then close item C and move on to item D. Business items. We have 3 items tonight, this afternoon. Number 1 is D1, which is the status quo financial forecast for the long-term financial plan for fiscal year 2022-2023 and fiscal year 2026-2027. And this afternoon, I'm very honored to welcome for the first time in person our Finance Director, Ms. Guillory. Thank you for joining us in person and welcome.
Thank you.
Can you please move and provide us your report if you don't mind?
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you, Mayor Salini and Mayor Pro Tem Murphy, members of the staff and members of the public who may be watching. For this item, I will be giving an overview of the status quo financial forecast for the long-term financial plan. Okay, so starting with an overview of the city's financial planning and reporting process, the long-term financial plan drives or starts the process of developing the 5-year capital improvement plan, as well as the annual operating and capital budgets. Those all work together to set not only the long-term view of the city's financial condition, but also how we fund our operations and projects on an annual basis for the operating and capital budget. So here's a number of key dates as we go through and develop the budget and long-term financial plan. On the 26th, we have, or April 26th, we have the special city council meeting. At that time, we'll be presenting the preliminary proposed long-term financial plan. We'll also provide a presentation of highlights on the baseline budget items and the capital improvement plan. It'll be some of the information that is provided this afternoon, which will go over to the full city council to hear what the baseline budget is for the fiscal year, as well as the status quo 5-year financial plan. As we go through the process, we have about 4 city council meetings, which we will be presenting the budget, the long-term plan, as well as the capital improvement plan. And this will also be opportunities for the public to give their input on all of these planning documents, as well as the annual budget. The goal is to have the final budget adopted by the City Council on June 21st. Just to give some background on the purpose of the long-term financial plan, it serves a number of purposes. The first is that it forecasts the city's budget condition over the next 5 years, and it also incorporates a 5-year financial forecast, starting with the status quo to determine what our baseline budget is. And what that means is if our recurring revenues are adequate to meet our recurring expenditures. The plan also identifies major financial challenges and opportunities as laid out in the long-term plan, which was attachment B of this staff report. And what that does is it lays out some of those challenges and allows the city to proactively start to address those challenges and opportunities through the annual budget process. Some of those will include, in terms of challenges, the unfunded long-term obligations, such as infrastructure needs, also the unfunded other post-employment benefits liabilities. And then on the opportunity side, there's opportunities for revenue enhancements, such as new tax measures or new revenue generating measures, as well as opportunities to reduce expenditures. And so what the plan does is maps out all of these options and then gives the city council and staff a plan to work from to start to address those through the annual budget. The plan also recommends policy and program changes, whether it's new programs or proposals for expanding existing programs. That's also addressed in the long-term plan as we look at the community needs over the long term. And then lastly, it serves as a reference to staff and the council for the development of the annual budget. It also provides information for financial and other operational needs. So the status quo financial forecast is basically the baseline before we add anything, any additional initiatives that are directed by the city council and or recommended by staff. This shows what our baseline position is. It should be noted that the status quo forecast does include the general fund and the Measure S 2006 and 2014. And it indicates that our ongoing revenues are sufficient to cover our ongoing expenditures. So at a minimum, our baseline is adequate to meet our operating costs before we make any changes or add anything to the budget. So all things held constant, we are able to meet those operating obligations. We're also able to fully fund our general reserve per the city's policy. And the policy says that we should maintain a balance of 50% of total ongoing general fund expenditures in our general reserve. We are currently meeting the policy, and according to the forecast, we'll be able to continue to do so. The status quo forecast also reflects a significant increase in fiscal year 23-24, and this is due to the retirement of some former redevelopment debt. And so that funding will flow straight through to the general fund as the debt will be paid off. And then lastly, the status quo excludes any non-recurring revenues and expenditures. So to give an idea of what is meant by recurring budget items, the revenues are those that the city can reasonably expect to receive on an annual basis over the next 5 to 10 years or on a longer term basis. That includes our tax revenue sources, our fines, licenses, and permits, interest income, charges for services are some of the examples that is included in the status quo or baseline forecast. The recurring expenditures are ongoing costs that relates to an ongoing city service or activities as they are delivered to the community. And those recurring costs includes costs for salaries, benefits, our utilities, maintenance of roads and facilities, as well as any mandated agreements that we have. An example of that would be the agreement that we have with Contra Costa County for animal control services. Just to give an idea of the non-recurring budget items which have been excluded from the forecast and the baseline, that would include a one-time sale of property that was adjusted in the forecast so that it doesn't carry forward. It was a one-time transaction. And then for the non-recurring expenditures, there were a number of council-directed one-time budget additions, and those were added to the fiscal year 21-22 budget. Those were one-time in nature, not ongoing. And there were also a number of staff recommended one-time budget additions that were added in November of 2021. Most of those were for some critical purchases of equipment and vehicles. Those have all been excluded from the forecast as well. And then capital projects are one-time in nature, although they may span several fiscal years from start to completion. They're typically one time, so they've been excluded from the forecast. So here's the list of assumptions that went into the forecast on the revenue side. So we use a number of resources as the basis of assumptions, and we came up with the average growth rate over the 5-year period. Starting with property tax, we use our property tax advisor, which is HDL, for the projections, and we're looking at average growth rate of about 8%. And again, it's higher, not because we're expecting an uptick in the real estate market, but more so because we'll have more residual and pass-through funding from the retirement of the former redevelopment debt. For sales tax, we also use HDL as our advisors. We're looking at about a 2% average growth rate over 5 years. Utility users tax and franchise tax, we use trend analysis. That's at a conservative 1%, just because we're seeing some very low to no growth in some components of those areas. For example, in the franchise tax, the cable component is showing very low growth. And that's mostly due to consumers moving away from traditional cable and using streaming services, which the franchise tax is not applied to. The motor vehicle in lieu tax, or VLF, we also use HDL. That's tied to property tax, and we're assuming a 5% average growth rate there. For transient occupancy tax and business license, again, using trend analysis. And what I mean by that is that we look at 3 to 5 years past. And then we also refer to literature and publications on what's happening in these areas in the more general economy to come up with the average growth rate there. For charges for services, that's mostly an interagency agreement with some of our neighboring agencies, and we're assuming 5% growth annually. Other revenues includes everything else. So that is our licenses and fees and permits, interest income, grants, and so on. And we also use trend analysis using a conservative 1% growth rate there. Lastly, transfers in, that is primarily the transfer from the pension trust fund. And that is to backfill any rising costs for the employer contribution of PERS costs. For the assumptions on the expenditure side, we also use a number of references here. For salaries and wages, we usually look at the memorandums of understanding or the labor agreements with the various unions. And we have a standard 3% growth rate there. For benefits, for PERS retirement, specifically, we use the PERS valuation reports, which are provided to the city on an annual basis. For other benefits, we use a number of rate schedules from various agencies, such as the Municipal Pooling Authority, which provides the insurance premiums for workers' compensation, as well as general liability and some of our other insurances. For operations and maintenance, which includes professional services, regular maintenance and supplies, we use inflation factor of 3%, which is pretty standard. Same thing for capital outlay. So important to note here that capital outlay in the operating budget is very different from capital outlay in the capital improvement plan. So this is the regular capital outlay for operating costs, such as computers, computer equipment, office furniture, things of that sort would be capital outlay for operating. And we assume a 3% inflation factor. For debt service, we refer to the debt payment schedule, which is pre-established. And we just pull the numbers from there for each fiscal year. And this debt service specifically is for the 2006 pension obligation bonds, which goes through fiscal year 2036. And then lastly, for transfers out, we use a flat dollar amount. This is mostly subsidies to the recreation department, as well as Pinole Community TV. It's to backfill the costs that can't be recovered through those operations. Also, the general fund provides contributions to some of the major events that the Recreation Department holds on an annual basis. And so that subsidy has been pretty flat over the years, and that has worked out. At the end of the fiscal year, we do look at the overall budget gap and make the transfer according to that. And it's been within the dollar amount that we've budgeted or lower. That was just to provide some of our forecast assumptions for the long-term forecast. Then this chart here just depicts overall at a high level the status quo financial forecast. You also have the detailed schedule, which is an attachment to the staff report. I'm showing the total revenues versus expenditures over the 5-year horizon. As we can see, we have a small deficit in projecting a small deficit in 22-23, and then expecting surpluses in 23-24 and 24-25. And then it goes back to deficits, but they're nominal deficits in comparison to the size of the budget. And we're confident that we can balance the budget structurally because of those lower amounts there. So overall, the city is in a favorable position when we look at the status quo budget and forecast. So next steps in this process is to prepare the preliminary proposed long-term financial plan. And that will be presented to the full council at the special meeting on April 26th. At the same meeting, we'll also present some of this information to the full council as well, as far as where we stand with the status quo and baseline budget. And then we'll also ask for council members to present any additions that or deletions, modifications that they would like to see done in the budget. And that concludes my presentation for this item. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I will turn it to the Mayor Pro Tem Murphy. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you so much, Director Guillory, for this great presentation. I also thought that the chart at the front was very helpful in terms of outlining the timeline for the budget development process. I wanted just to ask one clarifying question with regards to retirement of debt. One of the first slides mentioned we retired some debt from redevelopment. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that, please? Yes.
So those were bonds that were issued prior to the dissolution of the redevelopment agency. The city receives tax increment in the form of property tax for those redevelopment properties. A portion of that money is used to pay off that debt for those outstanding bonds. The remaining flows into the general fund as what we call residual or pass-through funding, and it goes into our property tax. Because the debt is almost paid off, it continues to decrease each fiscal year. And so what that means is for the next fiscal year, we're expecting more funding to flow into the general fund. And then as of 23-24, it'll be paid off and the full tax increment will flow into the general fund.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just one last question on the surplus and deficit, the chart. Can you go back to the chart where it outlined the surplus and deficits?
Mm-hmm. So as soon as it's up on the screen. Okay.
Thank you so much. You mentioned in the current 2022-2023, excuse me, not the current, but the fiscal year of 2022-2023, there is a bit of a deficit, and then we go into a surplus for 2023-2024.
Yeah.
Can you explain once again why that would be versus, why is it that why are we seeing those trends there?
Yeah. So 2023 is when we see the increased funding from the redevelopment agency. So that's a part of it. So it's kind of a balancing act because we do have increases in all of the revenue sources if we're looking at this from a total perspective, right? And then on the expenditure side, though, we also have increases such as in our PERS retirement, those personnel costs, which is the most expensive when we're looking at the expenditures, right? And so revenues may be rising at, X level, but expenditures are also outpacing the growth in revenue, if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Question number one is related to the inflation rate. I know that you are projecting 3%. The data that are coming back to us for the month of March of 2022, we are close to 8%, and this year I think we'll be close to 8%. I know that we don't want to do deflation, but we also I think the inflation is greater than 3%. And how do you adjust the consequences if we were to be at 8% this year and 6% the following year? What the consequences would be on our budget, and how can we adjust that?
So we could fall short there, but what we usually do and what is actually a best practice is to look at the CPI over a range of years. So we looked at the average over, typically you look at it over 3 to 5 years and determine what it is. For most of those, if we look at the operations and maintenance category, for example, that's a lot of our professional services, right? And so we have contracts for those, and they have escalators built into those contracts already, which is typically around 3%. And so we followed that same thing, but we looked at it over time as opposed to just 1 year. And I do realize that it is at 8% at this time. I think one of the things in monitoring is to make sure that we're monitoring that and determine if we need to make any adjustments there. But for the purposes of the status quo, I think 3% is acceptable.
Thank you. That means that it's not written on stone. If you want to make something happen, we can always adjust it as we go. Perfect.
Exactly. And it's meant to adjust. It's not a prediction, but meant to give us some insight.
So I guess this answer provide me an answer to the next question that I had, was related to an average growth in salaries of 3%. If it were to be greater than 3%, it's something that we can still adjust in the future.
Yes.
My final question is related to that chart here. Do we technically need to be balanced when we work on a forecast, or is that okay to be a deficit?
It's okay, because what it does is it shows us where we are, and then we can make adjustments from there. So we don't have to do that for the sake of the actual forecast, but it lets us know this is what we're looking at. So if we're looking 5 years out or 2 years out or whatever we're looking at, we're able to proactively get prepared to address that deficit.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Then I will turn it back to the public. Madam City Clerk, do you have any member of the public who would like to ask any questions?
No, there are no public comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I will turn it back to Council Mayor Pro Tem. If you don't have any other comments, I would please ask you to, we just have to receive it, so we don't even have to vote on it, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. If it's fine with you, Mayor Pro Tem, I would like to move on to the next item.
That sounds great, Mayor.
Thank you. I will move on. I will then close item number 1. Thank you, Director. Then I will move on to item number 2, which is fiscal year 2022-2023 general fund baseline budget, and we'll be receiving a report from Finance Director Guidori. I think that's a different presentation. Yes, here it is. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so for this item, I'll be given a similar report, and it actually has some of the same information as the two work together as far as the long-term forecast and the baseline budget. The baseline budget actually serves as the year 1 of the 5-year forecast. We've already been through the key dates. I won't rehash that again. So some of the highlights from the general fund baseline budget, again, it includes the main general fund and the Measure S funds. It indicates that our ongoing revenues are sufficient to cover ongoing expenditures. It doesn't include the non-recurring items, those have been backed out. And it also, as I mentioned, serves as the starting point for the fiscal year 22-23 budget, as well as the long-term forecast. I just wanted to take a moment to present the structurally balanced budget policy. And this is what we use to guide how we develop the budget. The policy applies to the general fund, and it says that we should create a proposed general fund operating budget that is structurally balanced. And what that means is expenditure or revenues are equal to or more than expenditures. It also works to ensure that the sustainability of service and expenditure levels are there by requiring the ongoing general fund operating expenditures be funded by ongoing revenues. So we use this as the backdrop as we develop the budget. And that was one of the main points of putting together these items, is to show what our baseline is and to show where we stand before we make any adjustments to the budget or incorporate any one-time additions. We've already discussed the recurring budget items, but just as a reminder, there's a recurring revenues that we receive on an annual basis over the long term, and then recurring expenditures for our ongoing city services and activities that we provide to the Pinole community. Then our non-recurring items have been removed. And then the assumptions are pretty much the same. The only difference is the growth rate is just a year-over-year growth rate. So it's from 21-22 to 22-23. So they, in some areas, they're a little bit different just because things were different for over 1 year as opposed to the 5-year average. But for the most part, the growth rates are all the same. And you see the basis of assumptions that we use for all of the various areas. And then the same for the expenditures. And then here's the financial summary of the fiscal year 22-23 general fund baseline budget. And as we can see, our revenues or uses, which includes our transfers, in total about $23.2 million. One thing to point out here is in the transfers in, we do see a significant increase from fiscal year 21-22 to 22-23. And this is the transfer in from the pension trust. And the significant increase is mostly due to the rising costs for the employer contributions to CalPERS pension, but also based on the labor agreements, the employee contributions were also reduced. And so we will be drawing down a bit more in the fiscal year 22-23 to cover those increased costs for pension. Then for the uses, which includes expenditures and the transfers out, as I mentioned before, we use the labor agreements for the salaries and wages, and the PERS reports for the benefits. Other benefits, we use our rate schedules, and for operations and maintenance and capital outlay, we have the 3% inflation factor. And then debt service, again, is based on the debt service schedule. The transfers out shows no growth. And that goes back to the subsidy that I mentioned to the recreation department, as well as to the Pinole Community TV. So overall for 22-23, looking at total uses of $23.5 million, leaving a deficit of about $164,000. Again, a very small amount compared to the size of the budget, and overall the city is in a good favorable position as far as its baseline budget. Already mentioned, for the upcoming meeting on April 26th, we'll be preparing some preliminary proposed documents and also asking for council member requests for additions and deletions. At that time, we'll also present to you all the items that you did add during the last budget for 21-22 to see how you would like to handle those for the year going forward. Some of them have already occurred, so we'll give updates and let you know where we are with those. And then for the ones that have not happened, you can determine if we'll rebudget those or if you'll shift the funding to other initiatives. So that'll be presented next time. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Finance Director. Then I will turn it back to Mayor Pro Tem Devin D. Murphy. Please go ahead. Questions?
Yeah, I two questions. I'm not too sure if they would go under here, but I'm just going to ask them now.
Okay.
I know a few councilman meetings ago, we talked a little bit about the process to the members and public members to public residents, excuse me, wanted to bring new ideas forth or suggest new additions. We would have some type of rubric. Is that still in the works? Are we still planning on that kind of process in terms of developing and discussion of the preliminary budget?
Yes, so we'll be launching a survey. That's one of those that we'll be doing. And then also for the special meeting, the idea is to be able to have those conversations too, since the meeting will be focused primarily on the budget, as it's not a regular council meeting. But going back to the survey, we're going to use the balancing act. And we're going to use what they call the prioritization module. And so for those items that we did, or the results that we gathered from the surveys that were launched last year, and the results are also included in the long-term financial plan, we're going to include those in the balancing act and then allow members of the public to go in and prioritize where those projects that they would like to see move forward. And it'll include capital projects as well as some operating initiatives, such as economic development initiatives. And we're using the results of those, the last surveys for those items that rose to the top and the ones that we actually have mapped out in the long-term financial plan. So this will be a chance for them to give their input as well as attending the meeting to engage in that conversation on the 26th.
Cool. Can you remind me the dates of the survey release and closure?
Yes, so the survey will be released early next week.
Okay.
And at this point, I don't have a closure date. Just because I feel like as we're going through this process, we want to leave that open. And so I don't have an end date at this point.
Great. And just was wondering about so the special meeting is April 26th. I'm wondering about the concurrent California State Legislature and how we of city staff, how we're watching kind of some of the developments amongst the California budget in this process.
So I'll take a look at that.
Okay.
But I haven't considered that just yet.
I just wondering,
Definitely,
not a big thing. It's great to see we're doing very well. Just thinking about how might we keep pushing around some of the things we've identified in our budget as potential opportunities. So for probably us as council members, but thank you. This is super helpful, and I'm looking forward to that survey and sharing that with the community as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, I have a question related to the property tax changes of 10%. Can you please let us know how you came out with that 10% determination, please?
Mhm. So according to our projections that our advisors provide us with, the regular property tax, so the regular 1% is about 6% growth is what they're projecting. The remaining portion is again from that former redevelopment debt service, which is significantly reduced from the last fiscal year. So there's going to be additional funding that's going to flow through to the general fund after we pay the debt for those bonds. And then that will be the second up to the last payment before that is completely retired.
Thank you. And what do you say, how can we have that balanced by $165,000 since we're deficit? Any suggestion you would like to provide us to move
Yeah.
on with at least I would like to have it balanced instead of having it to be negative.
Yeah, so one thing we typically do around that, so there are some things that we probably wouldn't change, such as salaries and benefits. They kind of are what they are. But we will look at non-personnel costs, such as the professional services and things like that, which those items that tend to trend below budget in any given year anyhow. We'll take a look at those and see if there's room to reduce those budgets to a more reasonable rate. So typically we look at the operations and maintenance category and see if we've probably, I don't want to say inflated, but budgeted a little bit higher than we needed to. And that's where we typically look for those to balance the budget.
Thank you. Do you think that would be possible to have it balanced?
So you like to show it as balanced in the
Yes, if it's
forecast?
possible, yes.
Mhm, I'll take we can take a look at that.
I would, I understand it's, we're talking about $100,000
Yeah.
out of 23 million. It's very minor here, but from a ethic perspective and just from the way the public look at us,
Yeah.
I think it will be good for the public to know that we at least have a balanced budget. That concludes my question. I guess that would be also my comment. Can we please have it budgeted? If we can work it on it, I would appreciate it. Turn it back to Madam City Clerk. Do you have any member of the public who would like to ask any questions here?
No, there are no public comments.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Murphy. Any comments?
First of all, thank you Larry, for putting this together. I always appreciate your craft. I do. I always appreciate your craft, and I always appreciate your timelines. And I think the more and more we get, I think the more that we, of course, have an idea of what our priorities should be.
Yeah.
I did mention this to the city manager in one of our. So I would just mention this now to the public as well, is that I know that we worked last year around the long-term financial plan and specifically the document that we talked about. And I did remember there were a few things that for additional revenue. So I kind of wanted to see if that was a conversation or a point of exploration. We thought, is that coming back to the council, or is there another kind of opportunity for folks to add feedback there?
Yes, absolutely. So that is, that'll be the goal for the April 26th meeting and as we update the long-term plan too, we will be providing some information on how those things have been addressed or will be addressed. Another thing to keep in mind is that the forecast that you have today that's the status quo. So we can run various scenarios, such as on revenue enhancements, for example, or new tax measures, and we could also include those as well. So that's how we would show those other scenarios as they come up. So yes, we'll be addressing those items in the updated plan to show what was done around that or what the plans are going forward.
Great. Well, I look forward to April 26th, and I don't have any questions. I'm again just very thankful for your work on this and for your team's work. So appreciate us digging into surveying the community to see what the next steps could be, and possible new requests from the public or even other council members. So look.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I made a suggestion and comment to have a finance director, Mayor Pro Tem, to have a balanced budget for that fiscal year. Did something that you also agree with me?
That'd be great. I think that'd be fantastic and very helpful for the team.
Yes, thank you, please. And as we are working on the real estate transfer tax and eventually becoming a charter city and that potential new revenue that could generate us, it's something that we can move on and anticipate once if a ballot measure were to be passed, and something that you can look at after that happens, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. That concludes my comments, and I don't believe we have any other comments on that item. That concludes item D2, then I will close it and move on to item D3, which is overview of drafts fiscal year 2022-2023 through 2026-2027 5-year capital improvement plan. And we'll be receiving a report and discussing and providing recommendation from Director Mishra. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Council, public and staff. We're going to present an overview of the capital improvement projects for the upcoming 5 years. Misha will lead this presentation and provide an overview, and we will answer some questions at the end of this presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, city staff and residents and those watching. Thank you, Director Mishra. I will be going through an overview CIP. So we have our CIP, which consists of 40 projects at the moment. We rely on the CIP as a planning document, helps us identify and implement the city's capital needs. For the upcoming fiscal year, there are 31 projects and there are 5 new projects. You'll see in this draft document that's in your packet, there's an additional project category that's been added. So previously the project categories were facilities, parks, streets and roads, and now there's a new category titled infrastructure assessments. Projects that have been added are listed here. They're in the 3 categories. First is the Pocket Park at Galbraith Avenue. There are 3 sewer projects, 1 outfall project, 1 replacement of the diesel tank, and then 1 sanitary sewer rehabilitation project. And in the infrastructure category, there is an energy audit that's proposed. Here is the budget summary that includes all of the proposed projects, and this is the summary in your packet. For 22-23, the estimated sources required are about 7 fiscal budget. So the next steps include, as we've presented in the past, we have many projects that are in the pipeline, many of which, as you may know, we have been working on a couple master plans and some planning documents. Safety plan, our sanitary sewer collection system master plan, and a PTAP report for our pavement technical assistance program. All of these documents will be presented to council. Our hope is to wrap these up before the end of the fiscal year. As of right now, we're reviewing the drafts of these plans and expect to add projects from these drafts into the capital improvement plan and program those projects that are resulting as recommended from these planning efforts. Also, there is a request for additional positions in the Public Works Division for the upcoming year to assist with helping us move many of our capital projects forward. As Director Guillory mentioned, there is also a plan to conduct a survey via Balancing Act, and there will be about the capital improvement plan within that surveying effort. And then to return to the Finance Subcommittee with the CIP document and the project sheets that provide additional descriptions of new projects that we anticipate adding to the CIP. And then we will move forward with presenting that draft CIP to the Planning Commission before we present it to City Council for adoption. Take it to questions. I'm happy to go back to any slides if you like.
Thank you for your presentation. Mayor Pro Tem Murphy, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Director Kerr, for your presentation as well. I I have a few questions, and I feel like the staff report was pretty straightforward, but I did have a few questions with regards to the numbers and then the new projects that were proposed for fiscal year 2022, 2023. First question is, you mentioned in the staff report the review of the drafts of the local road safety plan, as well as the sanitary sewer collection system master plan and the pavement technical assistant program report. Can you remind me what the sanitary sewer collection system master plan is, and then as well as the pavement technical assistance program report?
Sure. So the sanitary sewer collection master plan is a plan that we commenced back in 2020. So a consultant performed a hydraulic model of collection system and looked at sources to identify inflow and infiltration in the system. And that master plan will determine which basins need improvement, if there's any if we can mitigate any SSOs in the future. So it will present us with a document that gives a planning horizon of about 20 years with projects that the city should invest in to maintain our assets. And our pavement technical assistance program is a grant-funded program through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. It funds a consultant to come to the city to inspect our pavement sections and assign a pavement condition score, which is then imported into a street saver software. That software is a decision-making tool for the city where it can give us a guideline for what the condition of our roadways are. It splits it up into, our collectors, our residential streets, our arterials, and allows us to basically enter into the program the funds that we have and the needs that we have, and some sort of idea on how and where we should invest our dollars in terms of maintaining our roadway network.
Is essentially the criteria of repaving roads for our city? Is that?
Yes, that report will be, I believe at the upcoming council meeting, you'll receive a summary of the report that's for consultant that will kind of give you an idea of what the condition is of our assets and what kind of funding mechanisms are required to certain scores on our pavement network.
Okay, gotcha. Just wanted to list, so under infrastructure assessments for fiscal year 2022, 2023, first of all, I love that name. First of all, is there a reason or is there some intentionality behind adding that subtitle now? I have my own thoughts, but I would love to know staff's thoughts more than.
Director Mishra wants to add as well. But prior to this category, these projects were kind of mingled in with the other capital projects. And what we feel is we need to do additional study to determine what the actual capital project will be as a result of this assessment. So we feel like there's some prerequisite work to be done before this can get defined, but we want council to be able to track our progress on this work. So while we could, have these as part of the operating budget, it's nice to have them here so that when we do quarterly reporting on our capital projects, we can updates on these assessments as well.
Yeah. So when we see project number IN 2201, the energy audit, can you elaborate what that means specifically? Sure.
At one of the recent council meetings, we had discussions about installation of EV charging at various city facilities. And there has been conversation of incorporating any conservation projects, solar, battery backup storage at our city facilities. So the idea is this energy audit will give us the ability to conduct an assessment at all of our city-owned facilities to determine if there's opportunities for either incentive programs to install solar or any of the things that I mentioned already, but without really knowing what it's difficult to determine what the projects will be.
Sure. Would that include the, just to be clear, you said city facilities, would that include places like the library that are owned by the county, but city residents use it?
City owned and operated, we would not spend our dollars unless there is a grant fund, then we can help, but normally no.
Thank you. The other two mentions I wanted to mention, I can't remember the conversation, but I do. So I vaguely remember the mention of municipal broadband feasibility. I remember we did, as a council, vote on 60,000 as a way to kind of give resources to the start. I know it's been deferred to this next fiscal 2022-2023 year. It was my understanding that project IN 2103 recycled water feasibility received $250,000. Maybe I was wrong, but I, for some reason, thought there was a lot more funded for that.
So that one, that was 200,000, but we lost 2 years. So it's 60,000 to do the feasibility. And then hopefully there is a project identified, which we can start with the remainder of the a project that exceeds that amount. We'll return to council and say, we'll get approval for the project, and then whatever the additional funds are, once we're at that phase, we'll ask for additional funds. But this was a way to program that money. We didn't anticipate needing 200,000 to conduct the feasibility.
There's more, and the reason I asked that is because this term feasibility, can you explain a little bit about what that's going to look like with the $60,000 per well, it looks like 60,000 for the municipal broadband feasibility as well as the recycled water, but we only have 30,000 funded for emergency power critical facilities. Although that doesn't say feasibility next to it. So I was just wondering about those numbers and what that term would actually mean.
Sure. So for the emergency power for critical facilities, our emergency operations plan is currently being updated. So once we receive information from that plan, we'll really be able to know which facilities of ours are categorized as emergency. And then we'll be able to lump IN 2103 the energy audit, because those two things kind of go hand in hand in terms of if you're evaluating a city facility for battery backup storage, then which facilities are considered emergency facilities, and they can we can couple up those two kind of audits together to determine which ones need power. It's almost like if we have an emergency facility that needs infrastructure, that's kind of what we're envisioning, is maybe a facility needs backup. Then we've moved over the $170,000 in the next fiscal year to fund that. Whereas the feasibility projects require a little more in-depth review of of developing that project and what that looks like. What are the constraints? What are our goals? What are our objectives? It's a little bit more research. So in terms of recycled water feasibility, we've had preliminary conversations with East Bay Mud. East Bay Mud had a plan to do. So it involves a little more conversation with other project partners to really define what that project will look like.
Just to add to Misha's explanation, this infrastructure assessments that we created that because all these projects has a definite need of a planning, meaning to say a document that is going to tell us what to do. And that is why the split in the dollars, we actually want to spend the money on understanding the need, then going to the next step of addressing it in the next fiscal year. That's why you see the emergency power for critical facilities being split to 30,000 and 170,000. And as far as a recycled water facility, we were also in contact discussion with the city of Hayward. And the thought behind splitting that is having a consultant coming to the city of Pinole and understanding, is there a use or a appetite for recycled water facility or feasibility, meaning how many users, where can we use, is whether it is going to pan out in terms of the dollars we're going to invest in this particular recycled water project if we ever take up. So that is the feasibility part of it. If we think it has legs, then we spend more money to identify and draw up a plan. That's how we thought we can better use the funds.
Just a last quick question on maybe even tied to that is I see in the fiscal impact, it says that we have about $59 million in identified projects. And of those, I don't know if it says of those, it actually just says 1.7 million are listed as unfunded. Is there a plan or is there a recommendation that's going to be given to the council from staff with regards to that 1.7 million in unfunded projects? Or are you all just kind of looking to the council to make that decision point?
$1.7 million. Once we go through the process, we may have some ideas. We're not there yet. A couple more rounds, then we'll refine it a little bit. Then we may propose something where it will come from, whether it's a grant fund or should do something else about it. But we'll have some recommendations.
And I'll also add to that. So that unfunded is resulting of from two projects mainly. And I'll give you an example. One of those being the Appian Way Complete Streets project that's scheduled now. So we have STEP funding to do the preliminary engineering and design, which is for about $100,000. But it's estimated that those improvements will cost approximately $970,000. Don't have the funds at this time, but once we have the plan, either we go back to the SNAP or we get additional grant funding when we're ready to move that project to construction. So the reason it's listed as unfunded right now is because we haven't identified a source for it. And that's similar to projects, the other project where that unfunded total is stemming from our sanitary sewer collection system projects. But again, we'll have more clarity on that as we're going through our sanitary sewer collection system master plan to identify how much money we will need.
A last question, actually, this is not a question, but I was going to say on the project RO1714 safety improvements at Appian Way and Marlesta Road, safety plan and what the results and commentary are from the public. I do know that this has been an important conversation for a long time. And I think last council meeting, we talked about how to kind of I don't know how you all are thinking about that in terms of so many priorities, but it is really great to see some of those improvements along San Pablo Avenue happening. I know we've gotten a lot of feedback simply just from the social media posting of those type of programs. I would love to see, particularly in areas like Appian Way and Marlesta Road, where we've had of not positive, statures and circumstances that aren't so positive to our community, how we can kind of expedite that, because I feel like those are real moments that we probably should just like dig into a little bit more. I realize it's a long process, but it's great to see it on there. I'm just wondering, how we can close out some of these really important improvements. So overall, thank you so much.
I'd also like to just add for that safety improvements at Appian Way and Marlesta, that project was formerly known as Hawk at Appian Way and Marlesta. And there was a conversation, as you mentioned, from a while ago, but we are able to leverage some grant funds that we received to install a full traffic signal at Appian and Marlesta. We're going through the Caltrans process now to get our funding. But that is one project where we hope to advance to construction to install a traffic signal. And as you mentioned, our local road safety plan will characterize intersections and high injury corridors and help us secure additional funds to make improvements at those sections that, you know, haven't had such positive experiences.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, and fantastic presentation, and looking forward to talking and chatting more at council meeting about this. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Let's move on, and I do have a few questions. Question number one, it's first of all, thank you for your presentation. Excellent. What is the total unfunded capital improvement project cost that we have here? Do you know?
For the upcoming fiscal year, all of the sources have been identified, but for the 5-year total in fiscal year 2024-25 and 26-27, we have a total of $1,770,000 that are current.
Okay, and then do we have, thank you. Do we have any other project that have not been, I have a list of a capital improvement plan. How many do we have that have not been? I thought I had the conversation. I guess the one related to the roads is not the state condition of the roads right now that require probably $40 to $50 million worth of repair is not even listed here or anywhere, correct?
That's right. I believe what you're referencing
Yes.
is the PTAP report. Is our unfunded burden
Yes,
in
ma'am,
terms
that's
of
what I was
maintenance
asking,
of
please.
our
Thank you.
roads.
And how much will be on unfunded burden? Everything?
Okay, now let me just give you a little overview of that. Currently, the PTAP program report is in the draft format. We expect the total need for the roads of Pinole to come to a PCI of 85 would be $1 million. For wastewater collection system, we have the ones, the SSMP, the sanitary sewer master plan is finalized. That would most likely give us projects roughly around $30 to $35 million worth of rehab work that needs to be done for the wastewater collection system. So these are just my best guesses right now, because once those plans are finalized, we'll have the final number. That's my best guess looking at the draft document right now. And another big component of our CIP is actually San Pablo Avenue Bridge. Even if we say here that, okay, this project has identified funding, we don't have those, over $30 million. Whereas 24 and 25 in the financial year, the next 2 financial years, we are expecting or hoping to get some grant funding to fill those that for San Pablo Avenue Bridge. So that's the, if you want to see the overall big picture, that is the biggest dollar amounts and the needs.
Thank you. What do you suggest? And once we get those numbers and reports finalized, when do you think we'll get those final reports, sir?
Those reports will come to you in the coming council meeting, I believe on May 3rd or May 17th. We have agendized those for the PTAP report, which would be the local, the streets, details of the streets and the PCI and the funding needs for that you would be able to see on that report. And I believe May 17th is also, we're going to bring the, I think so, May 17th or June, I'm not sure. But the SSMP, the sanitary sewer master plan, also going to come just before the budget gets finalized. You'll have those 2 reports.
Thank you. So it looks like the city will be in need of an extra $100 million worth of revenue to be able to catch up everything. And it is certainly something that the city council needs to think about how to create that additional $100 million worth of revenue. We'll have more
Yes.
conversation. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Yes, and that would be over a period of time. You don't want that revenue, right up front, but that need is over a period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do you think that how many years in that period of time that it would be roughly conservatively thinking? Are we talking about 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years?
Oh, no, I mean, for road projects, the earlier we do our road rehabs, the less amount of money we need to bring our PCI to a good, 85 or very good level. So I would say for the road projects, if we had enough money to actually complete all our road rehab work for, say, 7 to 8 years, that would be ideal. And for sanitary sewer water collection system, that also have to be pretty similar time frame, because we don't want to dig up the road after it is rehabbed. So there has to kind of go both hand in hand. My best case scenario, because of such huge projects going to be taken up, I would give myself a span of about 10 years to complete those.
Thank you. So we are talking about $50 million for the road and another 30 million. That's 80 million over 10 years. We are talking about approximately an extra $8 million per year of revenue that the city would have to generate. And this is with you, Director Guillory, a conversation that we'll need to have about what type of funding and new sources of revenue can the city expect to fill in the gap of those $8 million of revenue within the next 10 years.
Yeah, and then other financing options as well. So whether it's general obligation bonds, lease revenue bonds, there's other financing mechanisms that we may want to consider in terms of debt and maybe in combination with revenue generation.
That is excellent. Thank you, directors. Thank you for your presentation. I don't have any other questions at this moment. I will turn it back to the member of the public. Madam City Clerk, do you have any questions from the public, please?
No, there are no public comments.
Excellent. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have any comments?
Thank you.
Thank you. My only comment will be to you, Madam Finance Director, if we could have understanding or presentation of what are the source of revenue that the city council can have to increase the type of revenues. You talked about bonds and you talk about other sources of mechanism that the city council can use. And I'm personally not familiar with all of them. And I would probably ask if we can come with a memo or presentation that the rest of the council can be familiarize themselves with, so that we get to understand how we can improve and get those additional revenues. Would you agree, Mayor Pro Tem Murphy?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments, directors? Mr. Murray, do you have any comments? So before I close the item, no? Excellent. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. That will conclude item number D3. And I will so receive report and discuss and provide recommendations. So we receive the report, and the only recommendation, if we can, is to have that memo back from you, Director Guillory. I would appreciate it. Thank you. That concludes item number D. Then I will move on to the adjournment of the meeting at 4:10. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.